Harold Godwinson was the last Saxon King of England, his legacy often eclipsed by the bitter defeat of the Battle of Hastings. Yet, this singular bloody day does not define the man. Harold was a warrior of unparalleled ferocity, a general whose strategic genius brought the Viking Age to a brutal end. His victory over Harald Hardrada, the last great Viking king, was a clash drenched in blood and thunder, resulting in many tales both in Viking sagas and in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. Harold would also conquer Wales, and had a life that unfolded amidst one of England's most turbulent eras, a time rife with the fall of dynasties and the relentless uncertainty of fate. His legacy is one of immense victory, but also of crushing defeat, fighting to the bitter end. This is the story of the last Saxon king, Harold Godwinson. Harold Godwinson was born into a world awash in blood and conquest in the year 1022, a time when Viking rule held England in a tight grip, with Canute the Great reigning supreme. His father Godwin had been elevated to the Earl of Wessex just 2 years before Harold's birth, a remarkable rise from obscurity orchestrated by Canute himself. Godwin's lineage traced back to Wulfnoth Siward, a South Saxon thegn who had fallen from grace after rebelling against King Ethelred the Unready. Despite this stain of rebellion, Godwin's lineage was rich with regal blood. Historians and chroniclers have linked Earl Godwin's ancestry to Ethelred I of Wessex, the elder brother of Alfred the Great, and both being direct descendants of King Egbert. This connection places the House of Godwin as a branch of the illustrious House of Cerdic, founded by Cerdic of Wessex, the leader of the Anglo-Saxon settlement in Britain, hailing from the distant Germanic lands. Harold's mother, Gytha Thorkelsdottir, was a Danish noblewoman, the daughter of the formidable Danish chieftain Thorgel Sparkling, though little is recorded of his exploits. Through Gytha, the blood of fierce Danish warriors coursed through Harold's veins, blending with the noble Saxon heritage of his father. Harold had around 5 brothers. There was Sweyn, Harold himself, Tostig, Gurth, Leofwine, and Wulfnoth. He also had 3 sisters, named Edith, Gunhild, and Elfgifu. Harold's father Godwin experienced a meteoric rise to prominence. By the time Canute the Great met his end in the year 1035, Godwin had already cemented his status as one of England's wealthiest and most influential earls. Harold and his siblings thus grew up in an Anglo-Scandinavian England, basking in the privileges of high-ranking nobility. Following Canute's death, his eldest son Harald Hardrada ascended to the English throne, bolstered by the unwavering support of Earl Godwin of Wessex. However, the realm was not at peace. Alfred Atheling, a son of the deposed King Ethelred the Unready, dared to reclaim his heritage, leading an invasion force comprised of Norman mercenaries. Earl Godwin, ever shrewd the tactician, intercepted Alfred's forces. In a dark act of betrayal, he handed Alfred over to Harald Hardrada. This treachery culminated in Alfred being blinded and brutally murdered. The blood of this betrayal tainted Godwin's name, staining his reputation. Yet, in the brutal calculus of power, his influence only grew. Harald Hardrada would die in the year 1040, and his brother Harthacnut would assume the English throne. Godwin would then back Harthacnut's ascension to the throne, again being on the right political side of the aspiring king and retaining his lands and status. Harold Godwinson would have been around 20 years old during Harthacnut's ascension to the throne. He would swear an oath of loyalty to the king alongside his father, due to the murder of Alfred Atheling, ensuring the Godwinson family was once more in the king's favour. After just 2 years on the throne, however, Harthacnut met a ghastly fate at a wedding feast. It is reported that he suddenly fell to the earth with an awful convulsion, and he spoke no word afterwards. Another son of Canute the Great had died childless, ending his line. With Harthacnut's death, the Viking grip on England loosened, and the line of English kings reverted to the ancient Wessex line. The last surviving son of Ethelred the Unready, Edward, was in exile in Normandy, but he was summoned back to England to claim his birthright. Earl Godwin, ever the puppet master, lent his formidable support to Edward's claim. Harold's father Godwin's backing of Edward the Confessor was not merely an act of loyalty, but a calculated move to solidify his own power and secure his family's future. Godwin's jurisdiction of his earldom would be extended to cover the rich lands of Kent. In the year 1045, Harold was appointed as the Earl of East Anglia, ascending to a position of immense power and influence. This elevation was undoubtedly swayed by his father Godwin's deep political connections with the king. Godwin, the wealthiest man in the realm, and arguably the most powerful, had manoeuvred to secure his family's prominence. The stature of the Godwinson family soared even higher that same year, when Harold's sister Edith wed King Edward. This union not only fortified the family's already substantial influence, but also bound Harold and the king by ties of brotherhood through marriage, making Edward the Confessor Harold's brother-in-law. The Godwinson family's ascent was now firmly entwined with the royal lineage. At around the same time as his sister, Harold would also marry. His wife was named Edith the Fair, although she is remembered to history as Edith Swanneck. She was an extremely wealthy and beautiful noblewoman from East Anglia, who herself had an impeccable lineage, with her mother being a Saxon princess. Although their marriage wasn't sanctioned by the church, and was done in the Danish manner, through a ceremony known as handfasting, this was seen as completely normal. The couple would have at least 6 children together, and their relationship was one of love, as well as a sound political move for both Harold and Edith. Harold had grown up during the reign of Viking kings, and although the line had been restored to the House of Wessex, he had witnessed dynasties fall. He also observed the political manoeuvring of his father Godwin to help secure his own interests, which had resulted in the Godwinson family rising from obscurity to becoming the most powerful house in England. This would have had a profound impact on Harold, who would have witnessed firsthand the impermanence of power, the fragility of life, and how to act during chaotic times. Harold's elder brother Sweyn had been appointed as the Earl of several boroughs, but he was exiled for abducting an abbess in the year 1047. His lands were then divided between Harold and his cousin. Thus, Harold was now his father's eldest legitimate son, with his older brother being in exile, and had absorbed some of his lands into his own. King Edward the Confessor would ally himself with Henry III, the Holy Roman Emperor. In the year 1049, Harold was dispatched to support Henry in this pact, commanding a fleet of ships sent to confront Baldwin, the Count of Flanders. Harold's role in this campaign underscored his growing prominence and the deepening ties between the English crown and the Holy Roman Empire. As King Edward the Confessor sought to consolidate his power, he drew advisors, nobles, and priests from his own Norman circle, heavily influenced by his mother's lineage. This influx of Norman influence was met with a staunch opposition from Godwin, who championed the interests of his countrymen. A violent clash in Dover between the townspeople and the visiting Eustace II, the Count of Boulogne, ignited a critical conflict. Edward commanded Godwin to punish the people of Dover, but Godwin defied his king, refusing to turn against his own people. This defiance was a bold stance against a foreign power, and also a direct challenge to Edward's authority. The Godwin family wielded immense power, controlling numerous earldoms, and even having a representative within the king's bedchamber. In stark contrast, King Edward's personal estate, though substantial, was likely smaller than that of his ancestors, and dispersed across various earldoms. This fragmentation left him without a consolidated local power base. Additionally, Edward had only recently returned to England as a half-Norman outsider, lacking experience in English politics and leadership. This set the stage for a power struggle between the formidable Earl and the inexperienced king. Edward perceived Godwin's refusal as a test of power, and quickly moved to secure the support of Siward, the Earl of Northumbria, and Leofric, the Earl of Mercia. With their backing, Edward successfully had Godwin detained and exiled in September of the year 1051, also remembering how Godwin had betrayed his brother, Alfred Atheling. Godwin, along with his wife Geitha and sons, Sweyn, Tostig and Gurth, sought refuge in Flanders. Meanwhile, his other sons, Leofwine and Harold, fled to Dublin. In the year 1052, Godwin and Harold launched small fleets and converged off the southwest coast of England. They then garnered support from the ports of Sussex and Kent, assembling a formidable force. This combined fleet sailed to London, where Godwin compelled the king to negotiate, threatening civil war. This resulted in a settlement entirely favourable to Godwin. Thus, the Godwin family's earldoms were restored, the Queen was recalled, and most of the king's numerous French favourites were outlawed. The Godwinson family had so firmly re-established its grip on power that Edward never again attempted to challenge them. However, Godwin's triumph was short-lived. In the year 1053, just 1 year later, while celebrating Easter at Winchester with some of his sons and the king, he suddenly collapsed, and there at the height of his power, died at the feast. Godwin's second son, Harold, succeeded him as the Earl of Wessex, while Harold's former earldom of East Anglia was bestowed upon Elfgar, the son of the Earl of Mercia. Godwin's eldest son, Sweyn, was ineligible for any titles due to his pilgrimage to Jerusalem, during which he perished in September of the year 1052 on the return journey. In the subsequent years, several earldoms fell vacant and were granted to Harold's younger brothers, further consolidating the family's power. In the year 1055, Siward, the Earl of Northumbria, died and was succeeded by Harold's younger sibling Tostig. Then in the year 1057, the Earl of Mercia passed away and was succeeded by his son Elfgar, which again freed up East Anglia. A reduced form of this earldom was granted to another one of Harold's brothers, Gurth, while the counties in Essex, Hertfordshire, Buckinghamshire, Middlesex, Surrey and Kent were amalgamated into a new earldom for another of Harold's younger brothers, Leofwine. Thus, under the reign of King Edward the Confessor, the Godwin family came to dominate nearly all of England, with the exception of Mercia. By this time, King Edward was largely content to leave the effective rule of the kingdom in the capable hands of his powerful earls, which were mainly the Godwinsons. In the year 1063, Harold Godwinson embarked on a bold and bloody campaign against Llewellyn ap Gruffydd, the formidable ruler who had dominated Wales since the year 1055. The Welsh king had unified the territories and presented a significant challenge to the ambitions of Harold and his kin. With the scent of conquest in the air, Harold launched a daring cavalry raid deep into Welsh territory. The objective was clear and brutal: to eliminate the King of Wales and dismantle his grip on power. Yet, despite the ferocity and swiftness of the attack, the mission faltered, and the enemy king remained unscathed, his rule unbroken. Undeterred by this initial setback, Harold regrouped and prepared for a more comprehensive assault. Later that same year, he joined forces with his brother Tostig, the Earl of Northumbria, forging a powerful alliance, aiming at bringing the Welsh king to his knees. This time, the invasion was meticulously planned, combining both land and naval forces in a coordinated strike designed to lay waste into the Welsh heartlands. The brothers led their armies with a relentless and ruthless determination, advancing through the rugged terrain, leaving a trail of devastation in their wake. Villages were razed, crops were burned, and the once vibrant landscape was stained with blood. The sheer brutality and relentless pressure of Harold and Tostig's forces began to take its toll. The Welsh king's own men, weary and demoralised by the onslaught, saw the futility of resistance against such overwhelming might. The desolation wrought by the invading forces had sown the seeds of discontent and despair within the ranks of the Welsh defenders. In a desperate bid to save themselves from further annihilation, the Welsh king's own men turned against him. Betrayal seethed through the ranks, and in a grim act of treachery, the Welsh killed their own king, severing his head. The decapitated head of the Welsh king was then sent to Harold as an offering, representing the devastating effectiveness of his campaign. This brutal act not only eliminated a significant threat, but also cemented Harold's reputation as a fearsome and decisive military leader. Thus, Harold now had Wales under his influence, and was now undisputedly the most powerful earl in all of England, taking the mantle of his late father Godwin. In the year 1064, Harold found himself shipwrecked at Ponthieu, an event shrouded in speculation and mystery. According to the earliest post-Conquest Norman chroniclers, King Edward had previously dispatched Robert of Jumièges, the Archbishop of Canterbury, to appoint Duke William of Normandy, Edward's maternal kinsman, as his heir. They assert Harold's later voyage was intended to swear fealty to William. However, scholars debate the reliability of this narrative. While William seemingly believed he had been promised the succession, certain actions of King Edward, such as his efforts to bring his nephew Edward the Exile, the son of King Edmund Ironside, back from Hungary in the year 1057, contradict this claim. Later Norman chroniclers propose alternate reasons for Harold's journey. Some suggest he was seeking the release of his youngest brother Wulfnoth, who had long been held hostage in Normandy, while others speculate that Harold was driven across the Channel by an unexpected storm. There is a general consensus that Harold was blown off course, ultimately landing at Ponthieu. Captured by Guy, the Count of Ponthieu, Harold was taken hostage at the Count's castle. William soon arrived and demanded that Guy hand over Harold. William now had England's wealthiest earl imprisoned, but knowing Harold's worth, the two powerful men no doubt had a negotiation that has been long forgotten to history. Following his capture, Harold accompanied William in a campaign against William's adversary, Conan II, the Duke of Brittany. During this campaign, while traversing the treacherous terrain near the fortified abbey of Mont Saint-Michel, Harold is noted for heroically rescuing 2 of William's soldiers from quicksand. It is said that William presented Harold with weapons and arms, bestowing a knighthood upon him. The Bayeux tapestry and other Norman sources depict Harold swearing an oath on sacred relics to support William's claim to the English throne. This oath, whether coerced or given willingly, would later be used by William to justify his invasion of England, setting the stage for one of the most significant conflicts in English history. Tostig's tenure as the Earl of Northumbria was a tale of contrasts. In external affairs, he achieved notable success, forging a friendship with the King of Scotland that largely secured his northern borders from trouble. He also led a delegation to Rome on behalf of King Edward, enhancing his standing in the broader realm, and helped his brother Harold in his campaigns in Wales. However, within his own earldom, Tostig's stringent measures to maintain the king's peace rendered him deeply unpopular among his nobles. In the year 1065, while Tostig was attending King Edward's court in southern England, his discontented nobles rose in revolt. They murdered his men and demanded his banishment. Harold, seeking to avoid the outbreak of civil war, refused to march to Northumbria to reinstate his brother. Faced with the rebels' demands and Harold's reluctance, King Edward agreed to exile Tostig. Tostig departed for Flanders. There, he sought to garner support from powerful allies, visiting William of Normandy, King Sweyn II of Denmark, and ultimately Harald Hardrada of Norway. He aimed to find partners who could help him reclaim his earldom and power. Meanwhile, the earldom of Northumbria was granted to Morcar, the brother of Earl Edwin of Mercia. To solidify his own position and strengthen alliances, Harold married their sister Ealdgith, thereby aligning himself with the influential Mercian brothers. Prior to the reign of King Edward the Confessor, in the 11th century, the English throne had been under Viking influence after the conquest of England by Sweyn Forkbeard and his son Canute the Great. Once the throne came back into the possession of the Saxon line, its power was much diminished. Edward the Confessor would be remembered as a politically weak king, whose death brought about one of the most famous succession crises in history. At the end of the year 1065, Edward the Confessor fell into a coma, without clarifying his preference for the succession. He died on the 5th of January in the year 1066. He briefly regained consciousness and entrusted the kingdom to Harold's protection. Upon Edward's death, several people claimed that they should be the next King of England. The claims to the throne of these men were based on blood ties, oaths, kinship, and links to earlier kings. Each claim to the throne was strong. Among the contenders for the English throne, there was Edgar the Atheling, the son of Edward the Exile. Edward the Exile, who had tragically died en route to the English court, would have been named heir by King Edward the Confessor. According to the structures of lineage, Edgar was the rightful heir, being a direct male descendant of Alfred the Great, and the grandson of Edmund Ironside, who perished after the brutal conflict with Canute the Great. The recent years had seen the mysterious deaths and assassinations of many Ethelings, including Edward the Exile, thus making Edgar's claim to the throne one purely based on blood ties, as he had no lands, soldiers, or allies apart from the king himself, who was now dead. Standing in contrast was Harold Godwinson, the formidable head of the House of Godwin. and the Earl of Wessex. Wessex was the wealthiest and most powerful region in England, and Harold was also a prominent figure at court, renowned for his service to Edward the Confessor and his prowess in numerous battles. As England's most trusted military commander, his influence was unparalleled. Additionally, Harold's lineage was thought to trace back to Ethelred, the King of Wessex, and the elder brother of Alfred the Great. The crown had only passed to Alfred's direct line because Ethelred's son was deemed too young to rule during the dire threat posed by the great heathen army in the 9th century. In Norway, Harald Hardrada also laid claim to the English throne. According to his assertion, Edward the Confessor had usurped the rightful place of Hardrada's nephew, King Magnus the Good. Magnus had been named heir to the Danish throne by King Harthacnut through a binding agreement, and Magnus believed that this accord extended to the English throne as well. Edward had seized the throne before Magnus, who subsequently died childless. Harald Hardrada, who had been co-king of Norway alongside Magnus, became the sole monarch upon Magnus's death. Now Hardrada saw himself as the rightful heir to the English crown, viewing it as his inheritance, with Edward, the usurper of Magnus, now being deceased. Another formidable contender for the throne was William, the Duke of Normandy. He claimed that Edward had not only designated him as the next king, but that Harold Godwinson had sworn a sacred oath to support William's claim. Moreover, the relationship between England and Normandy provided additional weight to his claim. Emma of Normandy was William's great-aunt, and Edward had spent a significant part of his early life in exile at the Norman court. Thus, the throne of England was contested by 4 formidable men. There was Harald Hardrada, asserting his perceived rightful inheritance; William of Normandy, fortified by promises and familial connections; Harold Godwinson, the trusted military leader of Wessex, a man whose lineage also whispered of ancient kings; and Edgar Atheling, the legitimate heir by blood, yet a mere boy, powerless, and without allies. This clash of claims, rooted in ambition, lineage, and allegiance, set the stage for a dramatic struggle over the English crown. The day after Edward the Confessor's death, there was a meeting of the Witan to decide who should become the next King of England. The Witan was made up of a group of many lords and bishops, and they considered the merits of the main 4 candidates. But the whole principle of succession had been turned upside down by the interlude of Viking kings, and the Witan no longer felt itself bound to choose a king belonging to the line of Alfred, when it was obvious that a strong man was needed on the throne, and Edgar the Atheling was a mere boy. Whatever promises Edward the Confessor may have made to William, he undoubtedly himself nominated Harold as his successor. The day after Edward's death, Harold was unanimously elected by the Witan and was crowned by the Archbishop of York. But Harold didn't have time to enjoy his new status as king, as 2 invasion forces would soon arrive on his shores. Harold Godwinson's younger brother Tostig was known for his formidable military prowess. However, he was exiled for defying the laws of the land, and harboured a deep resentment towards his brother, who was now the King of England. In his bitterness, Tostig reached out to King Harald Hardrada of Norway and persuaded him to invade England. One of the sagas recounts that Tostig sailed to Norway and greatly impressed the Norwegian king and his court. Despite having only recently concluded a long and inconclusive war with Denmark, the initially reluctant Hardrada was swayed by Tostig's persuasion and agreed to raise an army, to claim the throne of England. Harald Hardrada, a towering figure in the Viking Age, was renowned for his formidable character and unparalleled war attributes. His name Hardrada, meaning hard ruler, reflects his stern and unyielding nature. Harold's extensive military career spanned several decades and regions, including battles in Norway, Denmark, and the Byzantine Empire. His combat experience made him a seasoned and battle-hardened warrior. In September of the year 1066, Hardrada embarked on his voyage to England. He made a stop in Orkney to gather essential supplies and more men, and soon after was reinforced by the traitor Tostig Godwinson, who joined him with additional soldiers and supplies. Hardrada soon arrived in England with the full might of Norway, bolstered by Tostig and Scottish forces. His fierce gaze set upon the unprepared coast. His army descended like wolves, plundering and burning like the Vikings of old. When they reached Scarborough in Northumbria, the locals mustered a brave but futile resistance. Without a moment's hesitation, the Vikings unleashed a storm of fire and fury, reducing the town to smouldering ruins. The flames licked the sky, sending a clear message to other towns, which swiftly chose surrender over annihilation. The news of the Northmen's arrival quickly reached Earl Morcar of Northumbria and Earl Edwin of Mercia. Determined to protect their lands, they assembled a formidable army and confronted Hardrada. So swift was the Northmen's arrival in England that the English earls did not have time to send word to Harold Godwinson, their king, but instead chose to fight the Norse invasion rather than submit. This would result in the Battle of Fulford. The battle began with a thunderous charge as the English struck first, hoping to catch the Norwegians unprepared. Morcar's troops surged forward, driving Hardrada's men back into the treacherous marshlands, but the seasoned Viking king, unflinching amidst the chaos, rallied his warriors. Reinforcements from the right flank crashed into the English centre, their fierce battle cries echoing through the marsh. Despite being outnumbered, the Viking invaders fought with a berserker fury, forcing the Anglo-Saxons to yield ground. As more Viking warriors joined the fray, they cunningly manoeuvred around the thick of the battle, opening a third front. The Anglo-Saxons, now outflanked and overwhelmed, faced a relentless onslaught. Blood soaked the earth, and the air was filled with the screams of the dying. The English forces, unable to withstand the brutal assault, crumbled and were decimated, with the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria retreating. The Viking losses were minimal and were less than 1,000 men. With York's surrender to Harald Hardrada, the victorious Norsemen retired to Stamford Bridge, 7 miles east of York, to await the arrival of hostages and consolidate their grip on a land they had so violently claimed. Harold Godwinson soon learned of the Viking invasion, and with relentless urgency, mustered as many earls, lords and warriors as he could gather. They travelled day and night, racing from London to York, a grueling journey of 200 miles, accomplished in a mere 4 days. This swift manoeuvre granted Harold the element of surprise, as Hardrada and his Viking horde remained blissfully unaware of the English king's proximity, until they physically saw the Anglo-Saxon army bearing down upon them. As the dawn of battle approached, a lone figure rode forth from the mist-shrouded ranks of the Saxons, a harbinger of death and defiance, his identity concealed beneath a black cloak. He approached Harald Hardrada and Tostig with a chilling proposition. No name escaped his lips, but his words cut through the cold morning air like a blade. To Tostig, he offered the return of his lost earldom if he would betray Hardrada. In response, Tostig, ever the opportunist, demanded to know what his brother the English king would offer in return for such treachery. The rider's reply was a grim prophecy, wrapped in the cloak of a challenge. 7 feet of English ground, for he is taller than other men. With these words, the rider vanished back into the swirling mists, leaving behind a stunned silence among the Norsemen. Hardrada, known for his warrior's heart, was struck by the audacity of the message. Turning to Tostig, he demanded to know the identity of the fearless messenger. Tostig's reply fell like a stone into a pool of silence. He said it was Harold Godwinson, the King of England himself. Swiftly after this meeting, the English army descended upon the Norwegians with a fury and would begin to massacre Hardrada's forces. Caught off guard and by surprise, the Norse warriors scrambled to meet the sudden onslaught. The advance of the English was momentarily stalled by the narrow passage of a bridge. It was here where a lone Norwegian warrior armed with a Dane axe and driven by a berserker fury would hold off the entirety of the English army. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as though this Norseman might defy the march of the English, but fate intervened. After the berserker had slain 40 Englishmen, an English soldier unseen beneath the bridge thrust his spear upward through the wooden planks, finding its mark in the groin of the berserk, bringing him to his knees, allowing him to be slain. Godwinson's army would then surge across the bridge. A relentless tide of warriors locked shields and charged. They formed a formidable line just short of the Norse army, their collective roar echoing across the battlefield. The battle quickly spread far beyond the confines of the bridge, transforming the landscape into an area of death and valour. For hours the clash raged on, steel meeting steel. The Norsemen and their decision to forsake their armour proved to be a fatal misstep, as they found themselves increasingly at a disadvantage. The English forces, relentless and unyielding, pressed their attack with ferocity. Slowly but surely, they fragmented the once impenetrable Norse shield wall, exploiting every weakness until it shattered. Tostig Godwinson, the traitor to the English, was slain in the carnage, as were many Norse earls and formidable warriors. In the heart of this chaos, Harald Hardrada stood as a beacon of raw power. His hands gripped his longsword with unwavering strength, carving a path through the enemy with each swing. It is said that he entered the legendary state of the berserker, his fury transcending human limits. In this trance-like rage, the 50-year-old veteran of 100 battles became a whirlwind of death, felling foe after foe with savage precision, a god on the battlefield. According to Harold's saga, this is what transpired. King Harold Sigurdsson saw this. He went into the fray where the greatest crash of weapons was, and there was a sharp conflict, in which many people fell on both sides. King Harold then was in a rage, and ran out in front of the array, and hewed down with both hands, so that neither helmet nor armour could withstand him, and all who were nearest gave way before him. It was then very near with the English that they had taken to flight. King Harold Sigurdsson was hit by an arrow in the windpipe, and that was his death wound. The Icelandic historian and poet Snorri Sturluson also wrote of Harold's death. The Saxons ran away from him. An arrow hit him in the chin, but he pulled it out. Another arrow hit him in the throat. Then he sat down. A friend asked him if he was hurt. Harold said, "It's just a small arrow, but it's doing its job." And then he died. Godwinson had now proved himself to be a brilliant strategist and commander, and would cement his name in history by defeating the legendary warrior and king Harald Hardrada, ending the Viking Age and killing the last great Viking warrior king. However, to the south, another claimant had landed on the English shores. William, the Duke of Normandy, had come for his crown, and as the English King Harold was fighting in the north, William was sailing across the Channel, with his aim being conquest and the forging of a new dynasty. William, the Duke of Normandy, sought divine approval for his invasion, securing the blessing of Pope Alexander II. But divine favour was not enough for the Duke. He also secured earthly alliances, weaving a web of political support from the Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV and King Sweyn II of Denmark. With his forces emboldened by divine and mortal alliances, William's fleet crossed the Channel on the fateful eve of September the 28th in the year 1066. Meanwhile, in the aftermath of the savage clash at Stamford Bridge, Harold Godwinson, blood-soaked and battle-worn, was forced to pivot southward with frantic urgency to face the looming threat of the Norman invaders. Seizing the fleeting moments, William and his war-hardened companions constructed a fortress at Hastings, a bastion of wood and iron, meant to shield the Norman horde from the impending storm of English fury. With the rising sun on October the 14th of the year 1066, the fields of Hastings beheld a convergence of two formidable forces. William, leading the Normans, renowned for their formidable armour and Viking lineage, faced off against Harold Godwinson, commanding the full strength of the English army. William divided his force into three groups: archers, foot soldiers, and cavalry. He placed foot soldiers armed with arrows and crossbows in the front line, foot soldiers in the second and in the rear squadrons of cavalry, and William took his place in the midst of them with the elite. From there, he was able to direct all sides using both his voice and gestures. As Harold's forces stealthily approached through the vales of the woodland, they ascended to the top of a commanding hill. From this vantage point, they launched a relentless barrage upon any Norman soldiers daring to ascend, hurling javelins with deadly accuracy before descending into brutal close-quarters combat. The English, forming a formidable shield wall, mustered their defences, with shields tightly interlocked, presenting an impenetrable barrier against enemy assault. The clash commenced with Norman archers unleashing their deadly volleys uphill, only to find their arrows futile against the steadfast English shield wall. As Norman spearmen advanced into melee combat, they were met by a relentless storm of javelins, each strike further diminishing their ranks. Despite the Normans' valour, William's soldiers found themselves unable to breach the unyielding Saxon defence. In a desperate bid to turn the tide, Norman cavalry surged forward, only to meet the same fate against the impenetrable shield wall. Yet, despite the gruelling exhaustion, the English army, emboldened by their recent victory over Harald Hardrada in the north, surged forth with unyielding determination. As blood flowed down the hillside, the relentless spirit of the English warriors drove the Normans back, reflecting their stamina, courage, and how formidable the English army was behind the warrior king, Harold Godwinson. As the Normans grappled with the steadfast resolve of Harold's soldiers entrenched upon the hill, they suffered grievous losses, causing the tide of the battle to sway in the favour of the Anglo-Saxons. This would result in a widespread retreat among the Norman ranks. Amidst the chaos, a rumour spread through the battlefield that Duke William himself had fallen in the fray. Seizing upon this moment of uncertainty, some Norman troops hastily retreated towards the sea, pursued by the advancing English, who finally relinquished their advantageous position atop the slope. Observing the disarray among his own forces, William, undeterred and resolute, cast aside his helmet, revealing his face. As he galloped through his retreating forces, he rallied his men with loud cries. Despite the brush with defeat, the Norman horsemen regrouped and surged back to the front lines. William then spearheaded a counterattack against the oncoming English onslaught. In the chaos of the battle, the English swiftly reformed their impregnable shield wall, bracing themselves for a renewed clash of arms. As the battle unfolded, its ferocity intensified with each pressing hour. The Normans, fueled by desperation, launched a final determined assault to seize control of the ridge. Amidst the relentless clash of steel, the toll of war became painfully evident. Numerous Saxon lords, valiant in their defence, met their demise upon the battlefield. Among the fallen were two of King Harold Godwinson's own brothers, Gurth and Leofwine, with one story telling of how the Duke himself slew Gurth, mistaking him for Harold. Undeterred by the devastating losses, King Harold himself emerged as a formidable presence amidst the fray, his sword flashing with deadly precision as he felled foe after foe in the relentless carnage of the battle. The battle would seem to never end, and it is reported that William had 2 to 3 horses killed under him and somehow still fought on, his body battered and injured from the falls. Nevertheless, due to the superiority in the Norman-French mixed cavalry and infantry tactics over the Germanic-Scandinavian traditional shield wall, William managed to breach the English defences, and in the melee that ensued, would overwhelm Harold's forces. Harold would fight until the bitter end, in the thick of the carnage, reminiscent of the Saxon kings of old. But fortune did not favour him at Hastings, and so Harold Godwinson, the king who had just ended the Viking Age, had conquered Wales, and had just forged his new dynasty of the House of Godwin, was slain there on the battlefield. According to one account, Harold was hacked to death at the hands of 4 Norman knights in graphic detail. The first, cleaving his breast through the shield with his point, drenched the earth with a gushing torrent of blood. The second smote off his head below the protection of the helmet, and the third pierced the inwards of his belly with his lance. The fourth hewed off his thigh and bore away the severed limb. The details surrounding the demise of King Harold at the Battle of Hastings are shrouded in a veil of ambiguity, as conflicting accounts and varied interpretations vie for prominence. Among these, the Chronicles of William of Malmesbury offer a vivid portrayal, attributing Harold's tragic end to an arrow that found its mark piercing his eye and lodging deep within his brain. Regardless of the intricacies of the accounts, historians concur on one pivotal fact. Harold met his end at the end of the battle, and fought until the bitter end. Harold's legacy often stands in the shadow of his adversaries. His pivotal victory over Hardrada marked the end of the Viking Age. He fought battles back to back, and forged a path of defiance against foreign aggression, defending his claim to the throne as a descendant of an ancient Saxon king, and also being entrusted the kingdom by the dead king Edward the Confessor. However, history often recounts Harold's saga through the lens of William the Conqueror, relegating his legacy to the sidelines. Yet, it is imperative to shine a light on this towering figure, to honour his mark on the tapestry of English history. and ensure that his tale endures. I would like to give a huge thank you to all of my members. Your contribution is valuable to the continuation of the channel, and I appreciate you all immensely. A special thank you to John Sides. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to like, subscribe and share, and I'll see you all next week for another History Profile.